Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Criminal Justice Corner. I am your host, Dr. Jennifer Matthews, and here at Criminal Justice Corner, we give you the real details surrounding the case. And just in case you find yourself in the same situation, we give you potential actionable advice so you can find your way out of that same situation. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Miss Rhonda Parker Taylor. Miss Rhonda, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
I would love to, and I appreciate you having me on this evening, and I can't wait to hear what your listeners have to say about what we have planned for them today.
Yes.
Like you said, my name is Rhonda Parker Taylor. I'm a writer, a entrepreneur, and academic researcher. I have a doctorate in business, but what I found is my soft skills is where I thrive. And knowing how to do a little bit of humanistic aspects of leadership. I have learned that I can take a fiction novel, which we'll talk about later, which is Crossroads. It's a fiction
Crossroads.
novel based out of Indianapolis, and it's about a murder of a 15-year-old girl. It is fiction, but all the sites are real. So I've
Look at
picked sites
that.
that you've never been to Indianapolis. You'll learn about the city county building, the city market, mayor's office, the parks, and then the dead bodies dropped on the west side of Indianapolis. And the juror, which is the main character, Paris Pennington, has life balance issues. She's a workaholic, and because she becomes part of the case,
Mm-hmm.
being a juror, she can't keep up with her life, and then things start happening to her. People start dying and getting sick around her, and it's up to the Indianapolis Police Department, much like we'll pull the case up of Orlando. Mitchell will pull that up and we'll pull it apart. The IPD has to figure out why it's happening to her.
I love that. I love that your book is fiction, but it references real places because let's say somebody in Indianapolis, it's in Indianapolis, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's say somebody lives in Indianapolis, they'll feel like really connected to the story because they might be like, "Hey, I was just there a week ago," or I work there," or that kind of thing. It's a fiction story, but they can like really connect to it. Or if somebody's not from Indianapolis, then they might want to go just to visit those places because they feel like a connection to the book. So I really like that.
Exactly. So then within each fiction novel, I do a self-help book. So there's a self-help book for those out there that'll be coming out around Christmas that is all about creating balance in all 13 dimensions of your life, which is, a major feat. It's just not your career home balance. And we could talk about that another time. Let's get to the case because boy, it's going to be good for them today.
It is going to be salacious. Unfortunately, Orlando Mitchell thought that he could take the law into his own hands back in September of 2022 when he waited outside of his youngest son's. His son was 1 years old at the time. He waited outside of his daycare. It was called Charity Childcare in Indianapolis, and he waited for the mother of his son to leave that daycare, 32-year-old Crystal Walton at the time. He waited for her to leave and he shot her in the parking lot. I mean, it doesn't get any realer than that when it comes to domestic violence. Now,
No.
we know that there have been signs displayed by Orlando Mitchell prior to that, but he ultimately killed her. So, my question to you is, what do you think the disconnect was? Because she had a no contact order in place, he violated that. She was taking the steps to separate herself from him in like a romantic way. What do you think the disconnect for him was that he still felt like he should pursue her in that way?
Well, I think there's two things going on here. There's the victim, and she's taking the steps, but it is shown through time, and if you go through court records, one in four women go through a domestic violence case at some point in their life.
Yes.
So there's some things that maybe she could have done, knowing he had this temperament
Yes.
going on and this obsession. And then also there's things going on in his life. If you go back and look, he's doing signals all throughout the
Yes, he
time,
was.
all the way up to the point he pulled that gun
Yes, he
and,
was.
and shot her. He is telling people that, if I can't see my son, my son won't see her.
Exactly.
There were things that were red flags for her,
Yes.
for his family, her
Yep.
family, the friends,
Yep.
probably even the daycare if they had any kind of conversation with her of any substance. So
Right.
I think that was a big part of it, is realizing in any domestic case to take it seriously until the temperature has been brought down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what was interesting to me was that his behavior was displayed early on. So they had a live-in relationship, Orlando and Crystal Walton. They had a live-in relationship, but once they whichever one of them initiated it, decided to part ways, he still wanted to, I would say, be in control, if you will. And they were trying to work out like a co-parenting arrangement. And he asked her, could he come over and get the son a day earlier than they planned? She told him no, and he showed up anyway. So that right there is a sense of, I'm going to do what I want when I want. I'm in control. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm going to do what I want to do. And it even goes back further to when she was pregnant. He was holding her captive in her apartment, and she had to call his mother to get her out of that situation. So the red flags were like obvious. They were like blaring the whole way through. And it's tragic that it ended in her death, but with domestic violence situations, they're so serious. What do you think, you know, I guess I don't know if it was a disconnect somewhere, but what do you think kept her in his orbit, if you will? Because she can't keep him away from his son. I understand that. But they were still connected some kind of way besides the son, that he still felt like he can control her or try to control her.
Right. I think the very first thing that a woman needs to do, whether it be Crystal or somebody that's listening to your podcast right now, is you acknowledge that there's that problem. It
Yes,
doesn't mean that women many times excuse it and say, "Oh, they love me, so they're fighting for me," and there that's a nice feeling to think, oh, that we want to put on ourselves. Yeah, that they're fighting for me and they can't stay away from me. But those signs are signs that something more may be going on.
I
So
agree.
any private investigator, police officer, if you're a criminal justice expert, um, would say that you change everything about what you're doing.
Absolutely. You change up
You
your
change
routine.
you change the locks, you change the schedule at work, you change the daycare, you change,
Yes,
the times you visit your family, all of those. And you must at all times communicate not only with your family, but the people that are involved. As a leader of an organization, I've had opportunities to work with women that were in domestic violence situations, and one that comes to mind that was the worst scenario. I
okay,
had to be honest with the young woman and say, what I need from you is for you to not let your core job fall, because I
okay.
don't want the situation to get worse for you. But what I
Mm-hmm.
can do for you is I can change your schedule. We can put a doorbell at the front, at office, so we know that if someone's come in if he's come into the building, they can notify us immediately and we can get you out. All the things can be out there. Same thing with the daycare in this particular case. She
Right.
could have said, "Hey, I need to drop them off 15 minutes early or than usual, or change the daycare altogether." Once
Exactly.
you see that things are going south and this
Hmm.
behavior is not going to change, as women, we have to take responsibility for our own safety.
Right. Now, the things you mentioned would enhance the safety of the lady that you were involved with.
Mhm.
Those things are all safety enhancement measures. So those are things that the listeners can do for themselves if they're in this same situation or they know somebody in this same situation. They can suggest those types of things. They can say, "Hey, try this, try that." So I think those are really good safety measures and they should be highlighted because maybe somebody didn't think of that. Maybe somebody didn't think to change the daycare. Maybe somebody didn't think to do the ring doorbell at the front door of their place of business, that kind of thing. But all of those are safety enhancing measures. And when it comes to domestic violence, you can never be too safe because we all know that when the woman, or if it's a man, whoever the victim is, when you're trying to leave your abuser, that is the most crucial time because that's when the things start to escalate. And that's what happened here with Crystal and Orlando. So it's just interesting to me that this happens more time than not, even though,
Right,
people they try to protect themselves. We want to give
right,
them that. They try to do it, but we cannot predict other people's actions. Now, with your books,
right.
you do those kinds of things. You do those kinds of research measures. How do you weave in real life into your books, but it's also fiction?
Well, when the first thing I do is I do my research paper wise. So I'll read
Okay.
journals, I'll read cases, I'll read, like, one of the hardest scenes for me in Crossroads was a stuttering boy that had seen the body that was calling it in.
Mm,
What is the level of emotion
right.
that,
That he should
that a
display.
person with stutter would have? And so
Mm-hmm.
I listened to 911 calls.
Oh,
I just sat there, and they have, apps where you can just sit there and listen to one 911 call after another. And so I did that, and then I ride with the police. I've gone
okay.
to different, they have programs where you can ride with them and observe. So I did that, and I think that the one thing that struck me about the Mitchell case,
Mm-hmm.
it when we picked it, is the volatility and
Right.
the emotion. And
Yes.
we've talked about what she could do, and we're talking about the victim aspect of, but what about the perpetrator? There's things all the way through the history that showed that he could not handle this kind of emotional break.
Yes. Yeah.
And immediately he should have been able to seek mental health, you know, um,
Absolutely.
help,
Yes.
because anytime there's a trauma
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of any sort, and
Right.
in this case, this was a trauma for him. And if you look at his life and his criminal history, he had some other things going on there, and his family knew it. So getting him to a mental health
Yes.
professional that could have helped him de-escalate before it got to
Correct.
that point is very important. And talking through, comments such as the one he made to his mother that, if he couldn't see his child couldn't see her. That's a pretty telling sign of where someone's mental health is. Either
Absolutely.
going
And
to
his,
take off
like you're
with the
saying,
child, yes,
right, or he's
or
going to do something to the mother. And
right.
like you're saying, even his mom showed up to the scene of the crime when he killed Crystal. His mom is one of the people who helped the police capture him. So she fully was aware of what he was capable of, what he was to a certain degree planning to do. So the question then becomes, why didn't she say something sooner?
Why
Right?
weren't they talking? Why weren't they all talking? Crystal was able to call when she was pregnant, the mother,
Yes,
and
she
get
was.
him de-escalated at that point.
Yep.
But why was there not some more communication to help de-escalate the situation? Because I don't want to put it just all on the victim, because
I
there
agree with
are,
that.
as a community, we have to take domestic violence seriously.
Absolutely.
Whether it be a sister talking to a brother, whether it be talking to your pastor, whether whether it's been going to a mental health professional or a social worker to get help. Um, Everybody involved has a role in helping the two that are in the situation get
Hmm.
out of the situation gracefully.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
And they,
in Orlando's case, he's still fighting the law. I mean, his case hasn't even though it was that long, they've been continuing it and they've been going through it because so everybody loses when they get involved in the criminal justice system. And then you have to think of the 1-year-old son.
absolutely. Yeah. He should be
What is going
maybe
to happen
two
if
or three. Well, three now, almost four.
right? Yes,
And not only that, Orlando is in jail because he hasn't been convicted yet, so he's still accused. But he even had an escape attempt in jail.
right.
He tried to escape. So the it seems to me that he's still not getting the help that he needs.
No, and I think that that's where all the way around the board, mental health has to be addressed in our society.
Yeah.
I am a big proponent. When I wrote Crossroads, I didn't realize exactly my path. I just wanted to write a bestseller. That I loved
Okay.
fiction novels. I loved the whodunit thriller kind of book, and I just wanted to write. I had a story, and I had been watching different cases in the Marion County courthouses for Crime Watch,
Okay.
trying to look for the inequalities or how cases were being handled. And at that point, I realized that there was no winners and losers in the court system. There,
It's
everybody
true.
was a loser. It didn't matter whether you're the juror because you're losing your time, your
Yes.
innocence, shot your maybe even money because what is it, $40 to be on it,
I know, right? It's
court.
not a day's pay. I tell you that. It's
No,
enough for lunch.
no.
That's about it.
And it doesn't matter whether you're the prosecutor, you're prosecuting somebody, so and you're representing, in this case, the family of a young woman that lost her life too early.
Yes.
And same thing with the defense. You've
Hmm.
got people that are trying to defend themselves
Yes.
from their worst moment in life.
Absolutely.
It may not be
Absolutely.
up, and that's something that in Crossroads I try to portray with the different characters is even the ones that you might think are undesirable, because they've done this heinous act,
Horrible thing. Yes.
but there's something charming about them or different or unique, that makes you can see there's good and bad in every person. And I think that, if we can handle it from the mental health before it gets to the court
Absolutely.
system,
Yes.
then as a society, we would be better.
I agree with that. But then also, our court systems would not be so clogged either if
Right.
we were getting people the necessary help that they needed prior to them committing crimes. Because if they were, let's say, if they needed medication, if they got their medication, let's say if they just needed therapy, they got their therapy, whatever that person needed, if they got their needs met, I feel like there would be less cases in the court system, in the criminal court system at the very least, to go through. And then, not saying that there will be winners, but there will be less cases to deal with at that level.
Exactly. And I think that we have to, as a nation, as a world, think of how emotions have a big part of
Absolutely.
crime. In Crossroads, I used three main emotions. I
Okay.
used anger,
Okay.
fury, and envy. And
Oh,
any one
okay.
of those could be a
Resulting
cause
in
for
murder.
yeah, cause of
Yeah.
murder. And in the Proverbs, it says, anger is cruel, fury is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? Envy makes the bones rot. and think about any time that you've been envious.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about just comparing, where
Yeah.
you're like, wow, I just wish I had that person's life, or whatever it might be. When you lose your sense of identity. And I would say in Orlando Mitchell's case, as I was reading it, it was almost like the fear of losing control and everything drove him mad to this. And that
It did.
you know, brought anger, fury, and the envy of the not having possession of his child, to a
Right.
point that he
Right.
killed the mother of his child at a daycare.
Exactly.
We learn
Because
to generate more control of our own emotions and have more
mhm.
emotional intelligence, and we
Yes.
teach that at a younger age,
Yes.
then people have the tools to handle those emotions.
Could not have said it better. I was thinking the exact same thing, that we have to get people at a younger age before they get to adulthood, because a lot of times when you've reached adulthood, you're kind of set in your ways. Not saying people can't change, not saying they can't be rehabilitated. However, the red flags are there for a reason, because they were missed early on. So if we can target people when they're younger, get them the help that they need, get them the attention that they need, then again, these things can possibly be prevented, because that's what you want. You don't want people to be victims. You don't want a society full of victims, and you don't want a society full of people in prisons and jails and things of that nature. So mental health is super important, and not having people commit crimes is even more important.
Right. And I'm a huge advocate of people helping their children deal through trauma.
Hmm. Hmm.
There is many studies right now, and if you're a parent out there and maybe your child has seen some vicious acts in their community, or has been victimized in some way, there's a term that they called adverse childhood experiences. It's called ACE for adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
And they say that if a child has experienced multiple adverse experiences in their life, they
Okay.
they're more likely to either be a victim or the perpetrator, or
Exactly.
have mental health issues, or all of the above. So, what there are ways to test for it, or to deal with children that have multiple adverse childhood experiences, but getting the permission to do it at the primary doctor level, or kind of very similar to how they might ask about, or do you feel safe at home. These are the kind of questions that sometimes need to be asked of children, because somewhere
Mm,
along the line, if someone has witnessed, and it doesn't mean that the act has to happen to them. It could be a divorce. It could be someone in their family going to jail. It could
right.
be a death. Um, all of those are adverse childhood experiences. So if you've had
Hmm.
multiple of those, your child's at risk.
Yes. Yes.
And so
And we
we would need to make sure, and we're talking about a woman and a man that's got a child, and we know now that this particular child
have an ace,
has an ace, at least one, if not more.
at least
How many
one.
times did he see abuse before it had happened?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And not only that, Crystal had other children. And we know for a fact that her other children saw this behavior. So not only is the 1 year old son affected, her other children are affected too. So they all need the help that you're referring to right now. So that's huge.
Exactly.
I didn't even know anything about the ACE. So that's huge for the listeners to learn something new, that if the child has these types of traumas in their history, that there is help for them out there, because I didn't know that, so maybe the next person did not know about that. So that's huge.
And by addressing our hurts
Yes.
individually, in our family, in our community, those, yes, it still will become a scar,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But
but it,
it, no, go
and you
ahead.
can learn mentally how to get over those scars. You know, we still have a family that in this scenario that's still going through the drama. They still have court dates
Absolutely.
coming up,
Yes. Yes.
and
Two
you have to
years
face.
later.
Yes.
Yeah. 2 years
You know, I
later.
lost my son, my adopted son, to gunfire.
Mm,
And he was at work and someone came in. And there's a whole process that you change through. The whole entire thing changes as you deal with each step of the process. In this case, it went from just being a finding out they were pregnant to, you know, domestic violence to death. Now we've still got it going on, you know, 3 years later. So you're talking about by the time this is over, a decade later,
right.
you know, you've had 10 years of trauma.
Right. Because he still does not have a definitive court date, and they're still going back and forth with everything.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I see exactly what you're saying. And it's just terrible that one, it had to come to that, and two, that domestic violence victims have to suffer through this type of abuse to get to the other side, because that's the only way that you can get through it. You have to, find a way out. And it's just terrible that it has to be that way. So, again, when you see the red flags, my advice is always to try to remedy that in some kind of safe fashion. So,
Exactly.
Rhonda, is Crossroads your only book?
It's the first fiction novel. I've done journals on the academic level and the emotional intelligence. I'll show the cover again. It came out at the beginning of last year. And then the second one, which is The Journey to Life Balance, is coming out around Christmas. That's the cover. And
Okay.
then Chosen should come out after that, which is another fiction novel. So I'm probably about a year out from all of those, and then there's more to come because I found that what I really love about writing is I can leave a footprint that can actually make a difference. So where,
Look at
you know,
that.
I can utilize my education in leadership to help us and guide us through um, some fun in the reading, and then also how can we do better in the self help.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that you're using, one, the tools that you garnered through education, but then like life experiences too, as being a leader. Because it's one thing to have the other education, but it's another thing to have the life skills. You've combined that and then also put it to work into your writings. I think that's amazing.
Well, thank you, thank you.
No, that's awesome. Now, where can the listening audience and the viewers get your books? Where can they go out and buy your books?
Well, they can Barnes and Noble, Amazon. If you're in the Indiana area, the Midwest area, all the Barnes and Nobles I've gone by and I've signed them for 'em, so you can
Oh,
get
look at
it.
that.
So you can do that, or you can visit my website at rhondaparkertaylor.com. And I'd be glad to hear anybody from the listeners. I'm sure we'll tag each other once we get this uploaded, and
Yes, for sure.
I'll love to hear what you guys have to say. And we'd love to hear your experience. Give tips. Let's share how we can prevent
Yes,
from happening. This is a wonderful podcast that everybody needs to hear about. You've got someone that's talented, that's leading the charge on not only taking the cases, but also saying, how can we improve and do better? So make sure you share
exactly.
and and follow so that everybody can hear about it.
I appreciate that, Rhonda, because that is so important to me. Because every episode of Criminal Justice Corner, if this is your first time listening, we always give takeaways. And in this episode, there were so many takeaways. I didn't even have to specifically point them out because every time we talked about something, there was a way that you could, potentially get yourself out of that situation or help somebody get out that situation, from the recommending your child to the ACE and getting them help that way, to mental health therapy, all those things, and seeking help if you're a domestic violence victim. All of those things can potentially help you if you or somebody is in that same situation. And that's what is really important to me about Criminal Justice Corner, is giving victims a voice, because everybody deserves justice.
Exactly. One thing I'm gonna jump back into the story, and I was thinking as you were talking, the importance of the police in this too. Not
Yes.
they have to investigate it, but had Crystal called them when it was had all the red flags been told, and when she
Okay.
was going to pick up the child, they do have where they can meet you at places that possibly the perpetrator can show up, and possibly she could have had an escort that day.
And
And
maybe
it's
she didn't know that, because I didn't
yeah,
know that they do that. How long do they do that for? Because
it
one
really
time,
it really depends on what their
it depends.
availability are, what their
Yeah.
availability are in the case.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say. Because one time might not be enough. 2 times might not be enough. A week might not be enough. So how
Right.
long, I'm wondering, do they do that? I guess you'd have to check with your local police department to see how
See what
long
they're
they would do that.
yeah, but
Yeah, because I
they
think
definitely
that's a really,
and the business can too, because I know I've been in organizations and we've asked for a police officer to stay on the premises for a week or whatever until
oh,
we
that's
felt
awesome. No, that's super awesome. I think that's really good. Again, safety enhancement measures.
right.
These are all things that can help somebody if they're in that same situation. And I didn't know that you could do that. Just call the police and say, hey, come here for this potential person. So that's really good to know. And another thing, and we'll end on this note, is that the daycare, unfortunately, could hire security. Unfortunately, because when you see this type of pattern going on, heaven forbid he'd have came into the daycare.
Exactly.
We know he just was in the parking lot and maybe he left or whatever the case may be. What if he came into the daycare? So this is the type of reason why you hire security. So
Exactly.
I think that's another takeaway, and not just for that daycare, but for any daycare or any business that is experiencing people inside that are having domestic violence issues. I think the security aspect would be a really good measure, because like you just said, what if the police are busy and they're not coming? You need somebody there. The mom can't
Right.
wait to an hour to go to work. She's going to be late. She's going to lose her job. So if you have security on site, then now there's that extra layer of protection still.
Exactly. Exactly.
No. Rhonda, I want to thank you so much for being my very special guest today. You provided so many insightful tips that I didn't even know about, and I do this all day, every day. So I just want to thank you so much for imparting wisdom into the listeners and the viewing audience. Thank you, and please come back again.
I definitely will. I definitely will. And thank you. And everybody, like I said, share. Dr. Matthews has it all together for you, and you can get all kinds of tips every time you listen.
Absolutely. We are available on a live podcast network. We're available on Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, you name it. You can find Criminal Justice Corner. So please tell a friend to tell a friend about Criminal Justice Corner, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Bye bye. Have a great